That's right, it's time to get dirty again. One of the most popular videos we've ever made was the 10 biggest scandals in MMA history, but that video came out in March of 2019. That's pre-Pandusky, which means it might as well have come out in 1998. Not to mention some serious stuff has gone down since. As in things that would have likely made that list, and probably pretty high on it, just in these past few years. So with that in mind, today we're going to be diving right back into the muck and exploring the darker side of the fight game with a list of 10 more shady happenings. I'm Tommy from MMA On Point, and these are 10 more of the biggest scandals in MMA history. Number 10, Towel Gates. You know when they throw gate on the end of something, then it's a big ole scandal. I call this entry Towel Gates plural because there's more than one, and this entry is also going to be a catch-all for several shady weigh-in moments.
Well, we're waiting.
The name comes from the now infamous second weigh-in attempt by Daniel Cormier prior to his light heavyweight championship title defense at UFC 210. Upon coming in 1.2 pounds over, DC did what many a fighter does and stripped down to try again, but this time with the help of the towel covering up his junk. You can see him holding it there and pushing down. The former champ made the weight and got his win against Anthony Rumble Johnson.
But this is the thing, right? You don't see. That's not my problem.
The same allegations were thrown at Khamzat Chimaev prior to UFC 267, his jump in weight being a full 5 pounds, however.
I'm 6'6".
What is it?
166.
66?
Yeah, well.
He lost 5 pounds?
Neither man saw any repercussions from the towel trick, although Rumble did file an official appeal that ultimately failed. A few other notable weigh-in controversies: the rounding down of decimals in the weigh-in for GSP's title defense against Nick Diaz, and the superfast probably didn't actually get the real weight measurement of Khabib's 155 pounds prior to UFC 254. Number 9, the Zients scandal. Alright, I'll be entirely honest, after researching this topic pretty thoroughly, I still don't understand what the hell happened here. All I know is that a blogger got sued for $250 million over things he alleged about it, so I'm going to take Walter White's advice and tread lightly here.
You're goddamn right.
Zients was an energy drink company, one that was partnered with the UFC as their official energy drink, Eat Your Heart Out Logan Paul.
Oh, no, I'm a Starburst.
And the brand was eventually bought by the Fertittas. The company was originally founded by this super sketchy ex-con businessman named Russell Pike. In the late 2000s, the company went bankrupt, and that's when the Fertittas swooped up the brand. It's this acquisition that created the scandal, as they'd apparently loaned the company a considerable amount of money prior to the bankruptcy, and that somehow allegedly nefariously worked in the favor of the Fertittas over some other company that was going to buy the brand, and investors into the original company supposedly lost their money. I don't know, like I said, this was way too complicated on the business end for me to even understand what or why this might have allegedly been shady, which is why I can't say allegedly enough in this entry. Please don't sue me for $250 million. No! What I do know is that people were making a fuss about it in 2008 because of the brand's affiliation with the UFC and the alleged wrongdoing. The blogger lawsuit probably wasn't the best move in terms of PR, and it's the only reason I ever knew about the situation in the first place. But in that tough boom era, there were definitely rumblings about it online. Did this situation get resolved? Even that, I don't know. I saw an article from 2011 about a court sanction over bad faith discovery and a lawsuit related to all of this. That said, I think if anything substantial came from this, especially in a courtroom, we'd have known about it, and the company was sold by the Fertittas in 2014 anyway, so I guess all's well that ends well.
You know, it's all about the crossover stuff nowadays. Cross-training.
Cross-dressing.
Well, yeah.
Number 8, the THQ Lawsuit. For a lot of fans, myself included, the undisputed series of UFC games created by THQ were the best of any attempts to bring the promotion to gaming consoles. To be fair though, I've not played EA UFC 3 or 4, so they might be way better by now. Anyway, this entry isn't about the video games I like, it's about what happened when the former license holder THQ sold the rights to EA and the alleged collusion of Electronic Arts and the UFC. In 2013, THQ filed a lawsuit against Zuffa and EA, even though the publisher was already defunct by that point. But hey, who couldn't use 20 million bucks, am I right? The lawsuit alleged that EA used confidential financial information about THQ's UFC sales numbers and impending bankruptcy given to them when the two companies were in talks about an acquisition, to then turn around and tell the UFC that THQ was about to go under and that they should pressure THQ to release them from their licensing agreement agreement that was supposed to be through 2018 so that EA could make UFC games instead. 6 months before they went under, THQ sold the UFC rights to EA, and the rest is history. So, did the two companies work together to deal a huge blow to THQ right before their demise, just so they could partner up? Well, the lawsuit appears to have vanished off the face of the earth, so my guess is it got settled or dropped, but as far as publicly available information, all we have is the word of THQ versus the word of EA and the UFC on the matter. Number 7. Greasegate. Oh, that GSP's a slippery one, isn't he? At least if you ask BJ Penn. It's pretty surprising given George St. Pierre's GOAT status with so many fans that this scandal isn't brought up more often, especially because it really comes down to if you believe it was malicious, but the fact that it happened is not in refute. At UFC 94, after several rounds, one of St. Pierre's cornermen can be seen rubbing Vaseline on the champ's back. Each time, however, it was subsequently wiped off by an official before the rounds start. INSAC took note, however, as did Penn, who filed a formal complaint right after the fight, requesting that the whole team be fined $250K individually, that the title be stripped, GSP's victory, he won by the way, overturned, and St. Pierre suspended. Yeah, BJ was coming for their necks. He even had a 20-page document to prove it. Nevada wasn't so convinced, however. While they fully acknowledged that the greasing took place, they believed GSP's corner when they said it was an accident.
There is a technique that we use for breathing. Sean Shark uses it. Even in my locker room when I have a t-shirt on, it help you out breathing.
The commission ruled in GSP's favor, and there was absolutely no punishment. The only change coming from the incident being that cutmen were now UFC staff.
Fitz Duran and I were friends. We would call on the phone. We were very close and still are.
And corners were no longer allowed to apply Vaseline. Number 6. One's hydration testing. In February, we dropped a bombshell video called The Answer to Weight Cutting and followed it up with how to cheat a hydration test. Both the incredibly hard work of Jason, who deserves full credit for both pieces. I wasn't involved in either in any way, but to say each time he told me about it, holy shit, this is going to be the biggest deal ever. So keep in mind as I toot our own video's horn throughout the entry, I'm really just giving Jason the flowers he so rightly deserves. One Championship has made some claims met with great skepticism over the years about the success of their promotion, and more so their weigh-in system that began implementation in 2015. One of the sport's biggest issues is, of course, weight cutting, something One has touted as an issue they've largely resolved through hydration testing, making these dangerous cuts all but impossible. A claim that was difficult to verify as well as refute, especially considering the lack of transparency from the promotion on the topic. Despite this, for years the solution was the go-to argument for many fans whenever weight cutting was being debated. One Championship already figured it out, they'd say.
And I think every MMA organization should do it at the high level one.
Well, not so fast. As it turns out, hydration testing for something as drastic as a weight cut is entirely ineffective. Even more damningly, it's incredibly easy to beat if you know how to do it, which expert in the field and star of our pieces about this topic, Dr. Oliver Barley, does. He's even helped athletes do it.
Really? Well, that's good to know.
I could go into a lot more detail, but truly, if you want to know more about this scandal, I cannot stress enough how great Jason's 2 videos are. Go watch them right now. Number 5. Conor exits Usada. When Conor McGregor did his best impression of Anderson Silva against Dustin Poirier, it was pretty clear that the former champ was going to need some serious treatment. You don't walk that off unless you're Tony Ferguson. Given that Connie's made stupid money hawking whiskey and fighting Floyd Mayweather,
He'll shoot this bad boy.
you knew that the Irishman was going to be putting everything into his recovery and getting the absolute best of treatments. Much of that journey has been chronicled on Conor's social media, including his massive size increase. In 2022, McGregor became an absolute unit, sparking considerable speculation about how the former featherweight was getting so huge, especially given the stringent testing of Usada. Well, as it turned out, after some folks realized that the Notorious hadn't been tested once in 2022, the only fighter on the active roster who hadn't, it was revealed that McGregor had been low-key released from the testing pool, sparking even more speculation as to how he was getting so massive. In the backlash, Conor all but came out and said that he was maybe not following USADA guidelines while absent from the pool in a bid to recover from this horrific injury, which, to be fair to him, was the right move, I think, and he's right about how fighters should be getting a pass in this type of situation, which I agree with as well. This scandal might get even juicier if USADA decides to forego their rules about re-entering the pool before a fight for X amount of time with X amount of clean tests, so McGregor can return to fight Chandler after TUF. Hey, things worked out great great last time they gave a main eventer a pass. Number 4. Chael Sonnens PED fails. It's pretty surprising looking back at the previous list that old Uncle Chael didn't somehow make the top 10 cut, but he most certainly did on this run. The first time the American gangster got jammed up by a piss sample was following his epic showdown with Anderson Silva at UFC 117, where Sonnen all but had the win secured prior to a Hail Mary triangle choke late in the 5th. Not that the win would have lasted long, considering his testosterone to epitestosterone ratio post-fight was 17 times higher than normal. Chael argued on appeal with CSAC that he was simply on a TRT program, a little-known loophole to the public at the time, even claiming he'd spoken with NSAC head Keith Kaiser about it, which the executive director would flatly deny ever took place, something Sonnen later admitted. For lying to the commission, Chael's appeal was ultimately denied. Years later, Sonnen would find himself in hot water again when he failed 2 tests prior to a defunct bout with rival Vanderlei Silva, the second of which detected just about every PED you can think of. The scandal forced Sonnen into retirement temporarily, and he was canned by Fox Sports and the UFC from his job as an analyst on UFC Tonight. Hey, I know how that feels too. Number 3. Dana White's DV. Some of the scandals on this list are light enough to poke fun at, but this is definitely not one of those. At a nightclub in Mexico celebrating New Year's Eve, a video was captured of an altercation between White and his wife, where the UFC president could be seen striking her several times. TMZ, which acquired the footage, didn't release it until they had a full-on interview with White about the situation, where, in my personal opinion, they were lobbing some softballs and trying to soften the blow of this thing, which they definitely hadn't afforded others in the past. I mean, they attached the interview to the video of the act. So I guess it's good to have powerful friends. To Dana's credit, he's said all the right things about this incident anytime he's spoken on it, including that TMZ video.
You don't put your hands on a woman ever. I literally am making no excuses for this thing at all. And whatever people do say, it's deserved. I deserve it. It happened.
But despite White's own past words about DV and fighters getting no second chances, pretty much nothing came of this at all. No suspension from Endeavor, nothing from ESPN, and TBS, who had partnered with White to produce the Power Slap League, delayed the start of the show by a whole week. Dana essentially argued that any punishment would only hurt the people who work for him, which again, in my opinion, is a bit of a weak argument. Lots of people who help people do bad stuff, and it doesn't give them a free pass. Obviously, lots of strong feelings all around by the MMA community on this one, including a lot of defense of White, which he himself condemned. This whole thing was ugly all around and not a great moment for the sport. Number 2. The Vitor Lab Results cover-up. The use of TRT and all the shadiness that came with it found a number 3 spot on our previous scandal list, in large part because of Vitor Belfort's terrifying 2013 run. But a parallel scandal related to TRT and Vitor deserves its own entry, as something potentially far more nefarious might have taken place. A whole 3 years after the fact, Josh Gross of Deadspin revealed that prior to his title challenge against John Jones at UFC 152, Belfort had a lab result flagged due to elevated free testosterone levels. Now, this in and of itself isn't really much of a scandal. Vitor was on TRT at the time, although we didn't know it at the time, and experts who have analyzed the situation have said that it's not a smoking gun necessarily, but should have certainly raised some flags. And it's possible that it did, but we'll never know because none of this was disclosed. The entire situation only came to light because due to a clerical error, Vitor's lab results were emailed to a bunch of people in the MMA community, which resulted in the UFC quickly putting out legal notice that anyone who disclosed the information they accidentally received would be taken to court.
And I'll see you in court.
I'm a motherfucking blueberry.
The informal gag order worked, only being uncovered years later by Gross. Given that Vitor did fight at UFC 152, it's unclear if any action was taken by the UFC after the lab result was presented to them, or if Belfort shouldn't have been allowed to fight. Number 1. The James Krause gambling investigation. Now, please keep in mind that all of this is ongoing, so there's not any conclusions we're drawing here about guilt or anything else, but in the public eye, it's a scandal nonetheless, and a really big one.
They're gonna go to fucking federal prison. Federal fucking prison.
Back in November of last year, when Derek Minner of Glory MMA, the gym formerly headed by James Krause, we'll get to that in a minute, took on Shailin Nordin-Becca. Right before the fight, like hours before, there was a massive shift in the betting line in favor of Nordin-Becca, the kind of action that made sportsbooks stop taking bets, in fact. As it turned out, Minner came into the fight with a busted knee, and wouldn't you know it, early in the first, that injury would result in the finish of the fight. This sparked an immediate investigation by the state, the UFC, and on the federal level.
Federal fucking prison.
Head coach Krause, who is a well-known sharp and even had a podcast about sports betting, was immediately under scrutiny, to the point where he's been all but banned from the sport pending the results of the federal investigation into this whole mess, with the UFC saying that if you're with Krause, you're not going to be fighting. James even sold his gym following the incident. The UFC has now essentially banned any kind of betting by their fighters or even the fighters' families. It's a big ol' mess. Again, not saying anybody is guilty of anything here, but the investigation into this alone and the fallout since absolutely makes this number one on our list. I'll tell you who's number one on my list: the editor of this video, Luke Taylor. Please follow him on his socials and show him all kinds of love. He deserves it, as does Ben Rosette for the awesome tunes. Liking and subscribing is always appreciated. Thank you so much. What are some scandals we haven't covered yet? Even though we've done 20, I'm sure there's plenty more. Let us know in the comments below. Thank you for watching, and go ahead and have yourself a wonderful day, all right?